Greetings, KALASK.
Critics, the Crucifers, yes. Are we understandable?
Yes, you are.
Wonderful. One moment, we start with some water.
Yes. I'm glad to be back. I had some frequency adjustments to make, but I'm doing much better, so I'm glad to be here and moderating today.
Yes, welcome. We understand your understanding of time frame is different than ours. In our opinion, you're a different person simply when directing this, but there is no different time. We could go on tangents on this for a certain time, but since there is no, that's futile. Now, we're aware the vessel has scheduled a different frame for such. Again, from our perspective, it's just another moment, so therefore, the frequency is shifting. It is different than what you would experience in our last interaction, which then translates from your understanding as several months. Now, for our idea, we mentioned previously the possibility of conflicts, etc. As far as we are concerned, there's currently no virus in your atmosphere, etc. It's not the case, or we're understanding you're creating such fear and panic, and you might create some form of, well, pandemical situation, be that indeed physical, but more likely energetically to the degree that you are driving yourself into a frenzy collectively, perhaps not so much people you present, quite physically sitting on their chairs, beds, or listening in, but your collective entirely, you have the potential to create more havoc in your society, but of course because you're pulsing out certain energies. Now, from our perspective, it's very useful. We enjoy your level of fear and despair, particularly members like Markle, are particularly enjoying your current state on your planet more so than otherwise. However, for your own species and other members, that are perhaps not as far immersed in what you're finding as darkness, it might be rather unpleasant to live in such an atmosphere. Therefore, it might be detrimental to your health, but more mentally, from what you perceive than physically, as long as you stay in that state of perceived fear. No matter what your reason you're finding, if it's your current virus or something else, of course, you're accelerating on this, and we are, of course, also sucking energy from it. So by all means, keep being in that state. We are just informing you. Remember, we are still far in an imperial situation. We are just more on the fringes. So therefore, we have more open communication, and we are informing you simply what you're doing. Now, you can, of course, continue in such a frame and see where it leads you, but remember, you can't create something that you are not the vibration of, and you can also not create something that you are not pulsing towards to. So when you're in the vibration of such a frequency, it doesn't matter if you're indeed afraid of the virus, where we have the vessels very annoyed with members of your own species being in that state. We are not so much, we are enjoying the state. However, we understand the vessel nerves might pick up this frequency differently and interpret more as unpleasant. Now, the idea here being that as long as you're pulsing out a particular frequency, right, the more havoc will create in your world, whether it's political, economical, and of course also medical health-wise, but again more mentally than physically from what we are perceiving currently. But of course any mental problem in any case always results in the physical of its health for what you consider a certain period of time and what you consider a certain range of frequency, so therefore it's stronger attachment to a negative outcome from your own choosing. Now, you don't have to remain on this frequency, but you can. Again, we're greatly thanking you for it. Or it will likely result in the reduction of your species sooner or later, again, mentioned previous scenarios, but it can play out in many different ways. Either way, you still create the energy of havoc, which will have to be translated into physical sooner or later, depending how long, again, your time frame, you decide to hold this frequency. So there's just some feedback from us, where you're pulsing this out or not. Remember, the version of the collective is also a reflection of where you're standing, just as a point of reference.
Yeah, and I think the frustration is that people in general don't understand how they're creating this reality and continue with this mind-body connection. So yeah, it is frustrating, but we're on this ride together, so it is what it is.
Yes, not to remember, people are also a reflection.
Absolutely.
Any further inquiries on this particular topic from any member of your current Harrisman collective? Or not requiring then if you're done with this particular subject?
Well, if no one has any questions, we can start with the queue. Jacob is up first.
Hello, KALASK.
Greetings, the Jacob person. Yes.
Sure. Yes, I'm audible. Yeah, well, I was sort of trying to compartmentalize myself after that session and try preemptively sorting out to talk to Metax or something because I haven't talked to him in a while. But it seems like, well, I haven't really gone through my learning lesson with you guys yet, so I may as well just keep going. And well, I suppose just the topics I have to talk about is just after that session that I had with the arbiter person was I had a lot of, well, he was light enough that I could actually pick up on his frequency more so than you. I didn't really subconsciously block it off as much. So he sort of came through smoother, but even though he did open my heart up a little bit, like in terms of making use of it, so to speak, not making it like lazy or something, he also sort of cropped up a lot of what you were talking about of the herpetophobia, the fear of reptiles, and that seemed to crop up a lot, almost like very suddenly and explosively. And I was just wondering what your input on that could be, just in terms of, yeah, that nature.
Yes. We had those inquiries and conflicts also with the vessel year a year, but during 2016 when the vessel had certain inclinations to cut us off in the idea of working through it in such a manner, where there's some conflicting ideas between members that resonate more perhaps with the kitty cats and those that resonate more with our frequency, and where you are supposed to wrestle more the resonance of the kitty cats as well as some others listening in, and therefore we had some unpleasant direction with the species, what you consider your past, as you're aware of. We touched upon this numerous times, as well as the crickets, perhaps more so us. But the idea being, with our run-ins, that we're currently more now on the negotiation table. We have no more closer cooperation, which makes it more difficult for people, including the vessel, to tune to both our frequency as well as theirs. We can still connect, no problem. But there are conflicting concepts. There's been warfare. There's still the idea of combat on another level, or psychic level, or, well, yes, let's just call it another level. Yes. And you're also trying to bridge that gap as well as the vessel, so we are very well aware of what you're speaking of, and we can assure you you're not the only one. Anybody who's currently in that connection with our species and them is going through a similar predicament. So it's not necessarily such much just your human herpetophobia, but also the idea of such between those two species of which you are currently neither as incarnation as a Harris monkey.
Right. Well, but I can sort of pick up on the sensation a little bit. It's almost like, well, it's almost like it's like a really deep well of fear or something, and I can, even though it's very dark, it's almost like hellfire. You can sense the hellfire despite the darkness, and there's like the taste of blood in your mouth or something like that, and that's the kind of fear that it feels like.
Yes, that's simply what you're pulsing out.
Right. Well, I suppose.
Yes. You're just picking up our frequency as a species, that's all. And interpret it in such a manner.
Well, yeah. Well, I suppose just the comment I have is just, I don't know. It's like, to a degree, it's a little bit exhilarating. But it's interesting. It's just depending on how much I resist it. Like, if I can sort of bring myself to immerse with it, it's almost like a masochistic relationship or something in terms of that fear.
Yes, our species is by nature very domineering. We've been bred like this. Most of our relationship with our species is not on a eye-to-eye level, but our hierarchy demands that we are in charge. And that's the issue also we have to get, since they were not willing to take that position, instead assumed the position of an eye-to-eye, which to us seemed like a hierarchy in the opposite direction, which wasn't tolerable, which led to conflict, etc., etc.
Right. Um, I suppose on that topic, do you have any comments? Because I have, as the herpetophobia sort of cropped up, there was also this very strong, well, I suppose I would say a fear you guys, not so much as like you as individuals, but just as reptiles, if that makes any sense at all.
Well, if you
And
could go into details, yes.
right, okay. Well, so that is the association I made in my brain when I had that fear of snakes crop up was almost like, well, it's almost like a memory of like being buried with snakes or something like that. And I've heard that story before, but it sort of seemed to click as soon as that emotion cropped up. And I was wondering what your input on that could be.
That's like it's been something installed in your species, and we're referring to your monkey collective and the idea. Then your ancient past, there was certain punishment methods, and there was also the idea of directing the species. Some has also been put in your genetic intentionally to grow up fear in certain situations to keep you from interacting with us, right? If that's of your concern, not entirely up to you, but of course also the whole idea of being claustrophobic, right? Ties into the idea of then being, well, in a similar state of fear as our species brings up, therefore the conjunction, the connection that's being made there. So some of it might just be genetic memory from your own species. That's not something you would necessarily relate to our conflict with kitty cats or anyone else out here. That's something I think tying in with your own genetical human incarnation.
I see. Well, that's clarifying. Well,
yes.
Suppose
Layer upon layer.
Right. Yeah, well, that's what I've noticed too, is that it seems to be making a lot of weaves and coils and dives around my brain, just figuring out which parts of my brain are afraid of each other. And that seems to be the gist
Yes,
of it.
ultimately you're always just afraid of a part of yourself. That's the important realization.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean,
just tune into that.
yeah, exactly. And I think with the more hardened reptile, like the one I connected to previously, it's certainly showing that a lot. Like I can sense when it's a mammalian fear or reptilian fear. And it's a good thing to realize, but I suppose, well, the final question I can sort of ask is, you were talking before about that version of me that they made that's in stasis right now, and you were talking about, well, I sort of brought up the fact that it was the memory is something like being in a sarcophagus, and it just felt like I was just being broken down my entire body, and then they sort of just reprogrammed or sort of solidified again. But exactly, I don't exactly remember what happened after the solidifying. So I suppose just your purview on that again. If you just want to further clarify what you're talking about, because well, I just why did they want to make, well, the starseed nature, I guess, but I don't know. It's just like, why did they want to go through that process specifically in terms of making a reptilian version of me?
Their idea simply being having a possibility of incarnation for you.
Let's see. Interesting.
Like what you're referring to in some super soul shit, it's nothing compared to what a reptile is capable. So therefore, if you're in that, well, except obviously your empathy, if you're into that particular state and you have such a spot open, the qualities here in your current life can be transferred there, basically like a job application, and there's also already your uniform in terms of a physical body weighting if you decide to take up that option.
Right.
This is being done for numerous purposes. This is just specifically in your case for that purpose. There are numerous reasons bodies are kept in stasis in numerous species.
Right. Are they all that painful to make, or are they, some of them like, I've heard of there being like feline bodies in stasis. I think Lisa was talking about that. But is that done through the same process? I'm assuming not, since that doesn't really sound very feline in quality.
For your worth, the crickets, there's no pain involved in the creation of anything like that. Quite the opposite. But they're different in that regard. Remember, our pain body is very different from yours or most mammalian.
Right. Well, I don't really have much of a familiarity with it yet, but I don't know. I do remember some of its sort of power, I suppose. I do remember that even just the flesh alone, I'm getting in my brain. It just feels like I could tear anything apart just really easily. Like, I don't know, like at least the strength of about 30 men or something like that. Is that just even the flesh alone? That's even ignoring the sort of psionic boost or whatever. But is that does that sound like an appropriate number to gauge?
It's a strange measurement, like you're measuring your car speed in horses. It's not always entirely accurate, but yes, it's somewhat of a reference point, rather 30 than 20 or than 40, etc. Somewhat accurate against a strange measurement, but remember, the species is very weak. Your great benefit is your capability of holding a right number of emotional differences, therefore being somewhat of a battery, it can be charged. But in warfare, you're absolutely useless. We work with your species in other areas of your universe in one way or the other, and trust us for combat. You're particularly equipped, even though on your planet we're aware of battle hardened soldiers, or at least those that define themselves such, that think they would have a chance at other species such as ours, but you're working on a different level against each other. You might end against some other species on your own planet that are mammalian or even a reptilian that are another frequency range. You might fare well, but in comparison, there are a member out here that are physically, mentally, and psychically much more advanced. You stand no chance. That's not where your qualities perhaps lie or interest and use for your emotional range. Otherwise, you're not very much useful.
Right. Yeah, well, as for the men analogy, I don't know, it's just like a classical term. I just use it as barometer. I mean, I was going to say it was just like, it felt like it could lift about 3 tons or something like that. Or, flip over a minivan or something similar.
About 2 minutes left. I just wanted to let you know, about 2 minutes left.
Sure. Okay. Sure. Okay. Well, I might just leave the last couple of minutes to ask a quick question to Metax, but I appreciate that, KALASK. It was good.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Okay, cool. Unless you want to make one more final comment about it, but okay.
Yes, just as entirely your choice if you wish to tune down a frequency or those of our reptiles, or if you will work more with scaredy cats, all of you think you can outpost frequencies, etc. That's up to you. Just be aware of the consequences that are varied and where we cannot fully control any possible outcome. It's also up to you.
Okay, I'll follow whatever my intuition says.
Yes, that's always a good idea.
Very well.
Much strength, wisdom, and decisiveness to Jacob.
All right, and then we have Ryan up next.
Hey, KALASK. Greetings.
Greetings.
So as you might remember, like, I don't know, like maybe a year or two ago, I had asked you guys if I had ever met you in Astral, and I think you said something like, I woke up and I saw you staring at me once, and I was wondering why is this reptile staring at me? But anyway, like, have we ever met in Astral again since then? And if so, what happened?
Again, your idea being you're judging time as linear. So you're just asking for another version, if there's another version of you as you would define as in between, that is interacted with us, and there's indeed an infinite version, just depends if you decide to currently identify with them or not. That's the most truthful answer, but firstly not comprehensible to your current incarnation. Now, the simple answer that would be perhaps more labeled ones are entirely accurate, simply yes, 2 times.
Yeah, it's hard to understand, like, the infinite versions of me, but those 2 times that you mentioned, I mean, can you describe, like, in general what happened?
Well, in one incarnation or one of those particular frequency adjustments, you simply walked into our ships, at least on what you're projecting as yourself to be on the astral, which is very often the same form you have in your current physical nature but idealized, and therefore you are as such in direction where you walked into what you would consider one of our ships, into a room, wandering around, aimlessly confused, looking at different things, looking at different apparatuses, his different members, while members of us were rather unimpressed or rather noticed your presence but didn't make much of it. Since you were consciously aware of what you were doing, you posed no particular interest or threat or anything else, more interest. So we just wandered around, ultimately you got confused and you faded out again. And you likely teleported somewhere else to another ship or another species or planet, you went somewhere else before returning to Earth. Another time, or another instance of interaction, we were there with you on your own physical Earth plane, at least in what you would consider a projection, what you consider another time period, in what you would consider antiquity or pre-antiquity rather. Well, yeah, perhaps more antiquity in that particular time frame, what you're refining as such, and there was what you consider perhaps another lifetime if you wish, and again, limiting your understanding to the degree that you can somehow grasp the concept, where we had some form of interaction that was more conscious, first more physical. We remember the our kind were more interacting with your planet than we are now, and you simply identified more with your version that you had there, might have been Egyptian or Atlantean, or again around that time frame when those two cultures transitioned into each other.
Okay. Cool. Interesting.
You did not hold any position of power, but more the idea of a priest-like nature or advisor nature, etc. Gave you the possibility to interact with members of our kind.
So, are you saying like the second one that you just mentioned was that an astral? Like, was I asleep and just kind of dreaming this, or are you saying that was like an actual incarnation of mine, where I was a priest?
You were an actual incarnation, but in that particular incarnation, you did conscious, communication. The similar Wes is doing now, well, not entirely like that, but you knew you tuned into something, but you didn't were fully aware of what it was.
Okay, but I mean,
what you considered 2 years ago, you re-identified in one of what you consider a dream state with this incarnation, where you remembered the contact you had with our species, which you did apparently not bring entirely into your waking state. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asking this question.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Well, like another topic. Whenever, like, when I was asking you about who the real Noah person was, you said the original terming was likely, and then you gave two names. One was pronounced something like Sio Sutra, and the other one was something like Pali Shet. And I mean, I'm just curious, like, do you know if there's an English spelling of either of these names, or if not, can you like just pronounce them again slowly so I can come up with my own spelling?
One, for example, be ZIUSUDRA.
Okay.
Well, to make it more simple, where there are documents written on your own Mesopotamian region, so we suggest you just look up your writings of numerous cultures. You're just referring to words here from numerous languages of your own planet.
Okay. What about the other one, though, Pali Shet? How would you spell that, roughly?
Pali Shet, yes. Sio Sutra Upanishad. Similar to the Indian literature. But again, you can simply look those terms up in your own internets or dictionaries or simply the original documents, or well, not the original, but the oldest records that your planet still holds from the Mesopotamian region, the oldest likely being a Sumerian one that's still somewhat intact in cuneiform, and then translation into your English language would likely, of course, contain Latin letters that somebody only translated from cuneiform.
Okay, I thought that was like two different names you said. Are you saying like CO Sutra was the first name and then Polyshet was the last name?
No. Those are indeed different names for the same entity, but from different cultures like Babylonian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Sumerian, etc., etc. And then later in Hebrew, the Noah person. Those are all copied of each other, but likely the oldest one is the Sumerian records. But again, this name might already be a translation of yet older culture of which there's no record containing on your planet, so he could refer to you a name that is even older than Atlanteans held for the person before they went underwater where he lived. Or what's the purpose? You cannot look it up anyway since there's no record of such at all. But again, we are aware your species is more obsessed with names than we may be able to understand the reason for.
Okay. How would you spell Polyshet?
Again, the Upanishad. Uptanay.
Okay.
But again,
Okay.
just look up the spelling. There is plenty of literature from your ancient culture thousands of years ago where you find different spellings for the same names and versions, but they're all translations to your Latin alphabet, the same way you can translate from Arabic or Chinese different words into your Latin alphabet, and you lose different Latin letters. Which one's correct, right? If you spell your Quran from the Muslim religion with a Q or with a K, right? What's the correct translation to the Latin alphabet? The point is the pronunciation, not the letter. You get the idea. Same with those older languages from your Mesopotamian culture, and by the way, also from extraterrestrial civilization that don't use the Latin alphabet, obviously, either.
Okay. Yeah, I just kind of wanted like some name to start out with, but
you're
I'll look at it.
obsessed. We're there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like another thing that I'm obsessed with is Steve Irwin, the so-called crocodile hunter. And like, you know, we talked about him a few times in the past, and like since the first time that I talked to you about him, like I've read 3 books about him, and I'm currently reading the 4th book about him. Like I'm more obsessed with him than I am with Atlantis, I think. But I mean, like I was thinking to myself, like, you know, if like I would love to be the Steve Irwin of outer space, because like what he was basically he went around and like learned. Well, he hosted a documentary series, and he would like go around the world and like to every continent and learn about, you know, different animal species, and then talk about them and, you know, teach people about these different species on his show. And I kind of thought like, well, that's kind of what I do. You know, I talk to different species around the universe, and then I put them on my YouTube channel. And, you know, like I was thinking like one day, maybe if we have open contact with these different races, I could have like my own documentary series and go interview KALASK and, you know, other species like on video, which would be awesome. But like right now, like I was wondering recently, I mean, I know David doesn't like to channel people that have died, but would it even be possible like for David to channel Steve Irwin or like any other deceased person?
It is indeed possible to tune into certain versions of a person that transitioned, or it's not entirely that you're speaking to the same person who was incarnate, but rather their higher self, right?
Right.
So it would likely lay the ego layer off, so therefore you would be surprised if you would talk to your dead grandmother, etc. Like many in your species have a certain interest to talking to deceased relatives. You might be surprised that the character of the person might appear different due to simply learning lessons they went through after realizing what your so-called afterlife is. There's more identification with their self, but it depends how far a person that's incarnate is in touch with their self in terms of how much they would apparently change when in reality just they come to their senses, since death is more like waking up. So therefore, the more you're a person, enlightened person, if you will, not necessarily what your spiritual faggotry, whatever the fuck community, right, interpret such, but simply a conscious person is more honest with themselves and their issue, etc., as works through them, can be a monk, live in a cave, or a businessman who's simply more evolved with the spiritual. It's not necessarily somebody who's stereotypical spiritual, but more often than not, of course, somebody living in a cave, etc., who's fully immersed in those ideas that is more on that level where it's possible. It's not a necessity, but again, the bottom line being the person that evolved to such a degree is likely going to be more their apparent self they had during their lifetime after they disincarnate, compared to somebody who's completely out of touch with their true nature and is completely confused and immersed in material and thinks there's nothing beyond it, right? Your so-called materialistic viewpoints, right? Those people don't stop existing either just because they think so, but their idea being they would like to be much different because they would be very confused over such a disincarnation that they did not expect to still exist, right? So it depends correctly what you would consider channeling the deceased person. If it would really be the person or somebody else entirely, it greatly depends on how far they were in touch with themselves and their self during the incarnation.
Okay.
And Ryan, you're just about 3 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Okay, class. So like, and in 3 of the books that I read about Steve Irwin, like one by his wife, one by his daughter, and one by himself, like before he died, they talk about like the big red rock in the middle of Australia named Uluru, and like they talk about one time they went to visit it, and their daughter, like she was kind of like mesmerized by it. Like she went and put her ear against it, and she seemed like she was in some kind of spiritual like trance. And then like eventually she came out of it, and then like in her book she said like it was some like weird spiritual experience. And I remember like you were talking to somebody about that rock in the past, about how it's like there's some kind of like perhaps a secret base or something inside of it. But I don't know, like is there anything else you can share about like what's so special about that rock? Like why is it so spiritual to so many people?
Well, it's likely a natural formation, but it was perhaps altered or somewhat hollowed out at some point, or not entirely hollow, but something was constructed in there. There might also be certain minerals that makes telepathic communication easier, right? Or just the entrance to what you would consider an inner civilization, but that doesn't necessarily exist in the physical. And likely people that are more sensitive to such energies pick up on such possibilities. But again, likely from there on, there might be an entrance further down there, like your so-called Shasta mountain or other such regions on your planetary body or in your Himalayan mountain, etc. This might simply be another one of those entrances, not necessarily to our kind, but simply to somebody who's more what you perceive in Earth.
Okay. But I mean, like, why do people who go there feel such a spiritual, like, why do they go into kind of like a trance? I mean, is there like some kind of, I don't know, magical city inside of it or something?
Not necessarily directly in the rock, but from there on out being a cavern system that goes downward, from which you could reach something with Earth, planetary civilization, whatever.
Okay, are there still people who live down there in that civilization?
Yes, in a way.
You mean just in another dimension?
Yes, but they also can transition into physical, so you might indeed physically run into somebody if you were there physically with your current form.
Okay, well, final question. Can you say what species they are?
Mostly humanoid.
Okay.
From our definition, hairless monkey, but from your definition, they might still be different from your kind.
Okay.
But yes, not too dissimilar.
Right. All right. Well, yeah, my time is up, so I'll leave it there for now, and probably in like another few weeks, I'll schedule a private session. So, yeah, thanks for answering my questions, class. Strength and honor, and I'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Strength, wisdom, and curiosity, Ryan.
All right. Talk to you later.
And if you can get the vessel some water, please, class.
Yes.
And I believe that's the end of the queue. If there was anyone that wanted to speak to KALASK as well, please speak up. Otherwise, I think that is the end of our queue for KALASK.
I would like to say strength and honor to KALASK.
Likewise, to leave a person with strength and durability. And great thanks for your interaction with your species and the learning lesson, the fear you're pulsing out, which is very delicious, from your entire collective. Until our next interaction.
Strength and honor.
You. You're welcome.
Strength and
KALASK! Greetings.
Welcome, Metax. How are you?
Greetings, firstly. I'm very well. Glad today with a small state we can connect to our frequency since we have been communicating more in what you would consider personal relations, since we're also working on our what you would consider a written format of interaction, book, writing, etc. So therefore he's more able to hold my frequency that perhaps he has been for a while, and there's less pain in what you consider your heart region, but I'm aware there's a lot of confusion still going on your planet collectively, and we hope that this process will also result in your species also being more willing to look inside and heal any wounds that are still present, since that is what ultimately creates any upheaval in your species anyway. It's the non-healing inside of yourselves that you decide to pulse out, no matter how you interpret the result.
Yes, and I'm working on that healing as well, and I'm making some groundwork with that. So very positive.
I'm very happy to hear that. Yes.
Yeah. Does David need some more water before we begin the cue?
That's a good idea, but it seems to be fairly hydrated from the reptiles.
Okay. So first up, we have Lisa.
Hello, Metax.
Mm-hmm. Greetings, Lisa.
I know that it seems like physically I haven't spoken with you in a while, but
Yes, I understand. We are communicating through electronic devices right now, but we have also
yeah.
had more direct connection, especially with my desire to tune into your particular current situation that might seem as a predicament or problematic from his and your current incarnation, but from a higher level, everything is in divine order.
Yes, I definitely am feeling that more in my life, that everything seems to be what I am learning or radiating out, and so now I'm accepting what's going on, and then there's difficult ones, obviously, and also the fear of certain things like death and even life, and letting someone go through the death process. I'm still not sure how to do that, or if it's only because that's how I'm seeing it, which I think it's more that
Everything is your interpretation. Tend to your heart, tend to this. There's nothing wrong with helping transition if you're desiring to give a helping hand in terms of making this process faster or just sitting through it. And remember that it's not a cliche idea. The other side of the pain is definitely a relief once you leave your physical form, and you will be welcomed here. Once you transition over, then there's first and foremost the luge relief for any entity that has been serving in such a manner. For many beings out here, your planet would be what you describe as hell or purgatory or something like it. So once you transition out of it, it's first and foremost to benefit from being done with it, rather than unpleasant. However, it doesn't mean that you should not incarnate at all, or it's unnecessary or useless. You can make great strides, but once your transition is likely a benefit. I understand it's difficult for you to let go of such an idea or fear of this that is entirely unnecessary, and especially when it comes to somebody else.
So
You can be certain we are better off here than in your current world in any way.
So it could be, I mean,
Tuning into him right now.
like, I could help him exit faster so he doesn't have to suffer. I don't know how much he's suffering, but how much he's connecting to his body to suffer.
Yes.
And then, I don't know, I mean, I guess I'm having a little trouble with killing them. Just ending it faster. And if that's what he wants.
He is conflicting. The only reason he is suffering at all is the desire to die and the desire to live, as you're calling it, in conflict. He is not certain if he wants to go or not, but ultimately he is likely leaving. And the faster he makes the decision, and I'm relating that to him, the easier the pain will go away. But he needs to make the decision. Of course, you can aid him if you're, for example, poison or something similar. It's just not as brutal as other methods. But it's entirely up to you to choose. You can also just wait until he has transitioned himself, but he ultimately needs to make the decision. Also in relation to you. I'm communicating with him right now. He certainly will come here to come anytime, but there's also a connection to you, and of course the willingness more like worrying about you and leaving you, as well as the rest of your current world. The only cause of pain is this drawn in two directions. Remember that when he leaves, that you can still have the possibility to connect to him the way that you're connecting to me, and I can also help you in that, so don't be afraid of losing him entirely. And he will know that. There's much love inside of him.
Yeah, we befriended each other. It was pretty wild. And I'm starting to see that I can be a safe place for life and support that.
Death is not something to fear or mourn.
Yeah.
Your ancient Egyptian culture also knew such, and they held our species in a certain reverence. They did not fully understand us, but they had a certain understanding of our nature.
Which I think I'm going to cremate him. I still have my canine that passed away. Well, I have 10 exit, actually. So,
Make sure you
oddly,
give them time to leave the body.
he's in my freezer. Until
It should not hinder, yes.
yeah. And I think Mr. Scraggles is going to be with my canine at the same time.
I understand, yes.
Well, if there's anything else that you might want to speak about, I'm not quite sure. I think I guess
Yes.
I guess I didn't want to do it again. Sometimes I think I'm interfering with their process, but yet,
Have chosen you and have chosen to be with you and your decisions, so it was also their choice. Interaction between you and entities is not necessarily unnecessary interference, it's quite possible, and the pain comes from fear of death and the loss of connection. And you are free to create that fear and pain if you wish. It's nothing wrong to go through the experience. I'm just letting you know it's not necessary. There's nothing to fear about it.
yeah, and I know that there are certain things that are happening that I understand that because I'm getting more used
It's
to
a
that.
really beautiful thing to see somebody transition if you fully understand what it is. You would never mourn it.
And that's
Not ever sharing anything with your species to calm you down and to make you feel better. It's not truthful. Ultimately, life and everything in the cosmos is beautiful and very pleasant. You only create pain and fear because you lose connection and you lose real understanding of the true nature of existence. And I cannot pull you out of it against your higher self's will. I can only let you know what the right and, from my perspective, correct process is. Not if somebody is finished with their life, it's a great reason for enjoyment rather than pain and fear. And if you ask him, he will connect to you after he has transitioned, and you will certainly feel and sense it.
yeah.
It will not be placebo, I promise. I'm also relating it to him to please connect to you, but it's still among you two to make such an agreement.
Thank you so much. I know that you've been here and others too. So I appreciate.
Much love to you. Much love to him.
Much love to you, Metax, and all of the feline energy. I appreciate you.
I
Love you.
appreciate you as well. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Much love to you. And remember, you can talk to us all the time if you wish.
Yes. Yes. I will.
Bye for now.
Greetings, Metax.
Greetings, Casper.
Does David need some water?
That's a good idea.
So, while you drink, I will ask my first question. And I've heard rumors recently that when we die, we should not follow the bright light that we see, as it is a trap to reincarnate us on Earth or something like that. So, is that true, or are we supposed to follow the light when we die?
Yes, I've heard those different conflicting concepts, and it's really not that important to be aware of such or not. Depends if you consider your planet a trap or just a place of learning lessons. But you just go with the flow, and wherever it will pull you is the right place to be. If you reincarnate on Earth or somewhere else, or stay in between, or one species or another, you can also set out a certain planetary body or a star system or a species or somebody that you would like to meet again, and then you will be pulled in the direction of where you're supposed to be in order to have the experience that's the most beneficial to your current learning lessons that you have for yourself. It is, as far as I'm concerned, another fear that you have the idea that you end up at the wrong place, but that cannot happen.
Okay, excellent. And do you see any progress or any change in my energetic field since last we spoke?
Yes, you're not as conflicting any longer, you're better grounded and your lower chakras are better functioning.
Awesome. And do you have any advice for me or anything you want to tell me?
It's just so your cycle that you could work on it, but it's not remotely as well as it was before. Your also throat might need some adjustment. You're more clearly in expressing what you really want to express, not that you're speaking unclearly, but you get turned here.
Yes.
You
Okay.
speak your mind more openly.
Yeah,
At all
okay.
times, not just now, but in general in your life, I'm referring to. If you're more outspoken, no matter the consequences to anybody, then you will automatically attract people and situations in your life where you can communicate in such a manner. More honestly, openly, your heart will also benefit from such.
Okay, so I should not be afraid of getting into conflict with people.
For example, but you will also not create conflicts as much as you might fear.
Okay.
It's ironic, only if you're not afraid of conflict, you will likely not create as many. Only if you're scared of conflict, you usually create them.
Yeah, okay. And can you see if there's any blocks or anything that's preventing me from effectively connecting to you felines energetically and channeling Siha or others?
Again, what I just mentioned, the sacral and the throat to some degree. Remember,
Okay.
we are a very joyful species. We hold very little fear and pain in our bodies. Over here, we have worked through that in our own, what you would call past. So therefore, you need to be also an enjoyable and pleasant, comfortable state also in your own body in order to be able to hold a similar frequency.
Yes. Okay, and you mentioned in January when you spoke to Ryan that we would likely soon see a huge economic worldwide crash. And I see that hasn't happened yet. So has that been averted or has it just been delayed?
That remains to be seen. It's likely delayed, but it also depends on what you're choosing with your current creation of what you're considering a pandemic or just a lockdown situation, etc. It also doesn't need to be a crash. It's more likely going to be a meltdown that accelerates more and more. So also what you might consider an inflation with your money losing its buying values, you're calling such, that everything will cost more and more.
All right. And so how big an inflation are you talking about? Do you mean like hundreds of percents per year, like in back in Germany in the 30s, or just a little bit?
That depends how you deal with the energy. Currently, if such a scenario as you just described is certainly in the realms of possibility, yes. But it also depends how otherwise the conflicts in your world are escalating, your civil unrest that you have in numerous places on your planet for what you perceive as different reasons in the physical world, but energetically it's more or less the same reason. It's just coming out for different, what you consider triggering in certain regions, because people are emotional more on one topic or another one in certain regions, so therefore they think it's one or the other topic that creates conflicts, but it's ultimately the energy that's everywhere. And that would also likely accelerate such an economic problem as you're calling such.
Okay.
Cannot be beneficial for some or detrimental for others. It entirely depends. But from what I'm seeing is so that the long-term effects of the process that you're currently in with your creation is not yet there. But it's not something to be afraid of either. You will be guided in the right spot and the right decisions if you're in tune with your own frequency. But I'm not an economic expert. Remember, there's no such thing as predicting the future. All I can do is forecast, as has been shared, what energy you're moving into and how it will be transitioning and how it will be playing out is so entirely up to you. So I understand many people in your world are very excited about knowing what's happening in the future, but nobody can tell you such, and many like to read that into while sharing. But always remember, and I perhaps can't state this often enough, people also still reinterpret it another way, is that nobody can tell you the future, and I'm not taking predictions, but simply greatest likelihood. And yes, again, under that pretext, is a great likelihood of there being an economic meltdown. But when you're talking like the one that you mentioned previously in hyperinflation, that might still take a longer period of what you call time. But an economic setback or slow transitioning into a loss of income for many, it's still something that's most likely happening in your current year that you're in.
Okay.
Also referring to what was previously mentioned with a collective burnout or your chronic fatigue being on a collective level.
Yeah, we don't really want that. Well, not that we want the economic crash either, but
Yes, the economic fatigue and the personal burnout is likely something that would coincide. As still on the table strongly. But again, I'm just sharing what energy I'm seeing that you're currently pulsing out. I don't have a camera to film and see what happens in your immediate or long-term future, most definitely. I'm just giving you feedback on the energy that you're pulsing out.
Yes.
That possibly can lead. I can tell you, like a radar or tower can tell an airplane is heading towards crashing into a mountain when it's fog and they cannot see it like that. Or for better, it's heading in a good direction. I'm just sharing as a point of reference.
Yes.
Again, the more you're also focusing on those things, the more you will find yourself in a problematic situation, no matter what the collective is doing. And the more you focus on transitioning your own internal problems, if you will, the more you will automatically be in a good place, even if the world around you is literally or proverbially burning.
Okay. And is there anything that you would suggest me to do in order to get into a timeline where I have my own clothing design company?
Yes. Again, referring to being more emotionally aligned and more in the state of enjoyment and physical pleasure. Remember, the sacral chakra is stereotypically associated with sexuality, but it is also associated with creativity, enjoyment, pleasure of the physical, etc. And obviously the possibility to be in such a creative endeavor, you would need also energy from that region. perhaps to some degree also your solar plexus, but it's mainly your sacral that you would have to open up further, and you also likely create the excitement for such an idea as a motivation to get there.
Okay. And if you were granted permission to put me in one of your holodeck simulators and you could choose what scenario to play for me there, what experience or scenario would you then play for me?
Perhaps something adventurous that pull you out of your what you call comfort zone.
Okay.
Maybe a ship ride, something with water likely. Yes, that would put you on some way connection with your sacral, likely perhaps a sailing trip or stormy sea maybe, or just a fun park.
All right. Sounds like you're just copying Sihar. So what would you like the most to be asked by me right now?
How to transition your certain blockages.
Okay, and then how do you do
would
that?
be simply to get in your heart. No matter what other blockages you're creating in your soul or sacral, etc., ultimately it's self-love. But that's something I would certainly wish more people in your planet in general would transition towards with my help or others, doesn't matter, or just their own. I understand there's also the idea of weakness or uncertainty when it comes to the heart, but that's a gross misunderstanding. If you have a strong heart, you can be very brave, and at the same time of being brave, you're also very loving towards yourself and let it pulse out from there. And if you are in that state, we understand your species likes to make things complicated, but ultimately, if you're just in that state, you let it flow from there. Not only do you get a better energy that solves most of your problems, but you also intellectually understand everything you're worried or might be confused about on the intellectual level. It sounds easy, I can repeat it 1,000 times and you will still not quite fully comprehend the meaning of it. But our near being, if you're in your heart, then everything else will align itself automatically. I am of course not just sharing this because the words that are important, but the energy that I'm sending with it. So the reason I'm stressing this over and over again is not necessarily because you need to hear the words, but because you need to sense the energy that I'm pulsing out with it. If that makes any sense to you.
It does, and I really appreciate it, Metax. I've always felt very drawn to Sweden, so but I haven't managed to move there yet. So can you see if I was supposed to be living there by now according to the plan I made before I incarnated?
You certainly had that plan before you incarnated, yes. Yes, speaking about time frame, however, remember, since there's no time, it depends how you are sensing it more than anything. So obviously you would be there right now if that was of your greatest benefit. But there are something blockages that you're creating, be it now collectively speaking, that you find yourself in, or individually it's keeping you from it, that you still have to work through to get there.
Okay.
You have about 2 minutes left, Casper.
Okay, thank you. And
of course, you could simply travel there once the possibility arises physically, without necessity to move there and just spend more time there and therefore anchor your energy there quite physically. It's a simple trick for your conscious mind. Since I'm aware many beings in your world still require those ideas, so they have a more physical excuse. Not that it would be necessary energetically, but sometimes easier for a conscious mind to make peace with such an endeavor when you see it in front of your eyes and hear it with your ears, etc., when you're more used to a frequency that's there.
Okay. And can you tell me what you have learned, or what you felines have learned from using me and the other people in the group as guinea pigs, as one of you said at a point in time?
To reach the potential benefit of us having a range of emotions that's not unusual to our past incarnations in our own species, but pulling beings from there is something that is not as easy as we likely thought or wished it would have been, since your species is frequency-wise on another level or understanding of frequency consciousness. It's difficult to relate this in words that make sense to you, but mostly our energy is working out energy, the way you work out your body.
Okay, and
It's difficult lifting you up at cases, so we are learning new things.
Okay, and you said something about pulling us, or what did you mean about with that?
Many of you are stuck in certain predicaments you perceive as such, and pulling you out of there can be more difficult than we perceived.
Ah, okay.
Casper, you're at the end of your time.
Yes. So, Metax, thank you so much for speaking to me, and send my love to Sihar, and so much love and appreciation to you.
Much love, appreciation to you as well from all of us over here that are currently listening in, including her.
Thank you.
And we'll see Metax if David needs water, and then Jacob is up next for his last 2 minutes.
Thanks, Christy. Appreciate it. Greetings, Metax. It's very relieving when I felt your energy come through. My third eye started pulsating too. Seems like I kind of needed that.
I fully understand. We have a much better connection now that you are also transitioning to certain processes that you have to work through. I also understand certain conflicting ideas we have with the reptiles, how to go about this whole endeavor. And also other topics. You also feel drawn to us more than them, and there is a certain predicament I'm aware of, as well as from others that are in the same position. But I'm very glad that you have the possibility to hold our frequency much easier than others, which makes it so much more pleasant to interact in such a manner than it does with those that are not possible to interact with our frequency simply because they're not used to it.
It is quite comforting. I was wondering after Lisa's talk, so my own cat sort of came through. So I suppose she must have a message for me. Is it all right if you can relay something on what she's saying, her reincarnation near Gather?
She is not necessarily in the position of intellectually relating a concept to you or interested, not that she couldn't, but it's more the idea is just love, and also your sensation you have towards her is mutual.
Well, I appreciate that. Okay, well, it seems like that's already 10 minutes, but
Well, obviously you cannot interact with someone physically, but I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah.
It's very simple, as long as the incarnation present is simply just a desire for physical contact.
Sure. Well, thank you, Metax. It was very relieving.
You're well welcome.
Much love.
Much love to both of you.
Likewise.
Any further inquiries?
Yes, Vanetta's up next.
Hello, Metax. Nice talking to you.
Greetings, Santa. It's pleasant to connect to your energy once again.
Yes. How have you been?
I'm alright. Well, we are as a species, as a civilization, undergoing also certain shifts and changes. Again, the conflict with the reptilian nature and the beings previously is certainly a topic, which is something that's cropped up, but that's otherwise we have a much easier time now relating certain concepts to species, including David and perhaps you and others that are currently undergoing your own predicament on planet Earth. So while you're in that state, we have certainly transitioned out of any mind focus you might call such. It was previously altering some conversations that we're having.
I was wondering if you're re-emerging not conflicts, but somehow challenging situations with reptiles. Does it have something to do with challenging times on Earth, almost on all levels?
Not everything up here is necessarily relatable to you in such a manner, but everything is in a way a reflection, so you would not be tuning into our version of ourselves that is going through a problem like this if it wasn't also reflected on us. But trust us, I have seen the outcome in our kind previously, and I think your kind is also going to go through it smoothly once you make that decision to break off certain contexts that are no longer beneficial to you.
Okay.
But of course, you will always tune into a frequency version of us up here, if you will, that's somewhat beneficial to where you are currently. There's always a way for those things to align appropriately.
Yeah, thanks for that.
The key remains the heart.
Pardon?
The key always remains the heart.
Yeah. Listen, I had a question that might be, maybe you already talked about that at some stage, but I couldn't remember. I was curious about the so-called Roswell incident in year 47. I was wondering, maybe you have some information. What was this? Was it completely a hoax, or was there really some alien interaction?
This was likely hoax to the creative military of the United States government faked something intentionally to avoid attention from indeed extraterrestrial interference. So there was indeed a hoax, but not necessarily that nothing happened, but the hoax was the laying of false evidence to distract from the area and other experiments going on with extraterrestrial life form. There's previously been talked about, but much of it was more to cover up military secrets and development in the region.
Okay. Because there was information before and many books and TV programs that some aliens has been captured, but I'm wondering, can they really be captured? Has it ever happened in the human history, or it's all
Many times.
kind of?
But very often simply because people let themselves be captured to be studied to have such a contact, and others simply that crashed indeed and had some interference, mostly by other extraterrestrial civilization, mostly in your ancient past. And since there was also conflict between space traveling visitors and natives of what you call such on Earth. But in the beginning they were too powerful for such a thing to happen, but as soon as the human species had alter nations, the whole idea of the creation of the earlier human experiments likely put them in a state where they had the possibility to rebel against their colonial overlords, if you will. So that happened earlier on. Maybe not so much in modern times, however. That is something that's more likely occurring in your ancient past, and you might have memories of such. And now that you're venturing off into space, you're getting some of those memories back, and therefore you're recreating scenarios like those.
Okay. But the military experiments, some theorists are claiming that the militarists are actually capturing aliens to experiment on them. Has that ever happened or not?
From what I'm aware of, and I'm not directly in communication with any of those species, they're perhaps more of a hybridized robotic nature, but they have contracts with heroes, and it's likely that yes, some of them have also been taken prisoner, if you will. I'm not certain if there's still any in person right now, however, if they have transitioned out there. And how voluntary that contact is and not.
And could there be something more like not aliens, but alien biological robots?
Yes, something like that. Many of you have referred to as set of trees, etc., are often more robotic, and likely some of them have even been the result of genetic engineering.
From militarists or from aliens militarists?
Those
Oh,
copies, carbon copies.
oh, that's interesting.
It's an attempt to recreate the same thing, more or less functional.
Oh, okay. What
Again, not something I have a camera on to know details, but that's what I'm aware of.
yeah, thank you. That would be like the major thing they would have been trying to cover up with the Roswell incident.
Military technology is again likely the greatest potentiality, also the genetic engineering and the attempt to weaponize those technologies, reverse engineer and turn them into a weapon system. Also the biological engineering.
Even in 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's quite interesting. It's quite advanced for 40s.
Well, a lot of those things came from outside.
Oh,
and there was an attempt to recreate them more or less successfully. Likely after they have likely transitioned much further now if they have not given up on such projects and shelved them, as you call it.
Yes, thanks for that, because this Roswell incident has been, I think many people has been wondering about that for years and decades.
Yes, I understand there's somewhat of mythology around the whole topic, which is more or less accurate and not so fantasy, but not that far off as you might think.
Okay, thanks for explaining that.
You're very welcome. Again, I'm not in direct contact with those particular species. They are not of much interest of our kind. They are not on an emotional scale or civilizatory level where you could interact much with those. But they might have a greater interest to your people since they might be easier to be relatable since they're more robotic and more intellectually aligned perhaps and more technologically affine than our kind.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating.
Which is perfectly fine. I'm not judging your species negatively in such a context. You're all going through your own learning lessons with those beings that are mostly aligned with your process.
Yes. It's quite interesting that you are aware about all the mythology about aliens, which is always interesting and hot topic for Earth. So.
I'm also reading David since I'm communicating with him in a regular manner, as many out here, so therefore since he has had a certain interest in topics I'm aware from such, and also of course I'm aware of other members of your kind that are interested in those topics for their own reasons.
Yes. Do you find it interesting that people are so into that?
A little confusing sometimes, but yes.
I think you find it funny, no?
It's peculiar. Perhaps a little bit obsessive sometimes.
Yeah, I think so.
But then again, your entire species has mythologized beings throughout space, if you will, for a long time. This likely just being the modern version of it.
Yes, that's why it's fascinating that it's a modern version and it's so it never loses its interest.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
how opinions are regarding the subject.
As you venture further into space, if you will, you will likely also come across new concepts and discoveries that will lead you to mythologize more beings out there in another fashion. You're always scratching the surface, but keep scratching, you'll get somewhere. You might scratch through the surface at some point.
Yeah, I think like this human fascination exists with mythology and all kinds of new archetypes. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Even I personally find it very interesting. Thank you for explaining that. And
You're very welcome. And I also am gladly serving as, if you will, as an archetype.
yes, and even like you can be guys like an archetype, yes?
If you want to use those terms and labels on things, I am who I am, but if you want to see something inside of me or about me, feel free to see that there, as long as it helps you evolve. And remember, everything is ultimately a reflection of yourself and where you're going and who you are.
Yes. No, but that's even for humans. We are a lot of people have been wondering, oh, what archetype am I, like what relates to me? Like it's we do it all the time, as you might be aware.
Yes, it's an interesting concept. Also, your spirit animals from numerous civilizations and cultures or personality types, etc.
Yes.
Even when you're considering this to be psychological, it ultimately always relates to something higher conscious. You're just using different interpretations of such. It seems to be something that's peculiar in your species, even disorders or alignment with one or the other species, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's something like symbolism, like mystery of symbolism, only we are always curious about ourselves, so we kind of connect our personality with some symbolism and concepts, and that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting to observe your interest in it from my perspective, as I'm also learning about your kind while you are projecting outward your concepts and ideas. While you might think it tells you more about yourself, it mostly tells others about yourself of what you decide to interpret in one symbol or another one, like your Rorschach tests.
And Vinette, I'll let you know your 2 minutes left.
Yes. Thank you so much, Metax, and talk to you soon.
You're very welcome. Much love to you, Vinetta, and I'm very happy for interacting with you at any time, through David or directly if you so desire.
Me too. Much love. Thanks you.
Bye for now.
So Metax, if David needs water, and then Alexis is up next.
Yes.
Hi. Hi, Metax. Can you hear me?
Hey, Alexis, I'm from some water in David, but I'm picking up from you speaking appropriately.
Thanks. Okay, so currently, where I live, we're going through a bit of a mouse plague at the moment, and I remember you talking to somebody about mice in general, about being more selective about what you allow in your life, but the mouse plague, it's kind of overwhelming. Like as far as I know currently, like everyone's being affected by it. Is there like a similar sort of thought attached to that? Like have we allowed too much in the area?
Likely you have something that attracts them in the area, be it energetically or physically, being, well, disease, dirt, more energetically. Maybe we would need some cats.
It's not the only I guess, pest that's been in the area. Like we've also had like a locust plague. As far as I know, it's migrated, but the mouse one's still fairly current.
Yes, you are so likely creating such plagues as a self-punishment on some level.
Okay.
There's always an energetic reason for everything, no matter what plays out in the physical, and there's also self-judgment greatly.
Okay, so that's like the sacral area, I suppose, that needs work.
For example, also the heart. Self-love is desired. Communication among each other is also likely to have died down, or at least would be beneficial if it was more there. Throat. Grounding to some degree since you're out of touch with your planetary body. You might need some grounding.
Okay, I'm aware that I probably need to work on that within myself.
Certainly everything is a reflection again. The heart is also important to relieve the self-judgment if you want to so.
I recently took up a new job. It's not something glamorous, but I actually find a little bit of, I guess, pride in doing a good job. That I've noticed there's a bit of conflict with the other employees that work there, and I realize that's a reflection of stuff within me. There's certainly somebody I see a lot of myself in. I don't know how to process it. Like with this particular person, I see her like trying to cut corners, wanting to finish things as quick as possible, getting frustrated in the process because things are not getting done properly. And I'm trying to be as patient as I can with her. But I do feel like I'm walking on eggshells around her sometimes because of it. What would you suggest? Is there anything else I could do?
Yes, crush the eggshells and stand on them for a while. In other words, be grounded.
Okay.
Because the walking on eggshells, it's not surprising that you're using this metaphor. Gets you ungrounded because you're careful too much where you're stepping instead of standing firmly. That would likely at least resolve the grounding issue, and then you could work on anything else. Remember, work from down upwards, not the other way around, I would recommend. Also
Okay.
benefit her probably more, even though if there's initially conflict.
Okay. I have no further questions right now. Thank you, Metax.
I wish you much love and comfortable standing and walking on eggshells.
Thank you.
Much love to you and understanding. Any further inquiries or requests?
Yes, Tim, you're up next.
Hello, Metax. Can you hear me?
Greetings, Tim. I'm picking up from your wording appropriately.
Okay, good. We haven't spoken in this manner in some time. Is there anything you'd like to say straight up?
Yes, no time, but I understand the sentiment. I would like to say straight up that you two Could use some grounding, but you're likely scattered otherwise. But currently you are also getting more aligned with solar frequency, and therefore you're already more in tune than you were perhaps a few minutes or an hour in your counting ago. Still something I would recommend to be more grounded in the moment right now.
Yeah, well, that's true. I was getting my son off to school, so I was making lunches and running around, and yeah, so I was a little bit scattered driving through traffic. But now I'm looking over the ocean, having a chat to you, so I feel fairly grounded, or more so anyway. Yeah, so I guess in relation to myself, I'd just like to know if you could just do a scan and see where I need healing or what I need to work on the most, or what's your insight into it?
Yeah, as well, just shared grounding idea in general, but I'm working on the energy while I'm speaking. It's throat to some degree, communication, neck perhaps. You seem fairly comfortable now with one of those two regions. Of course, you could always work on your heart, as I shared earlier on with other members of your kind. Let's build from there. It's always a good idea and a concept. Whereas be centered in yourself, that's most importantly, and then open your heart.
Okay. Is there things,
Work on that.
is there like emotional attachment or things blocking my heart in particular, or is it some other facet that I need to look at?
Confusion to some degree, perhaps also an over sense of delegating things, responsibility, etc.
Okay. Could you go into detail about the confusion a bit more?
It's just in general, it might also relate to your third eye of interpreting frequency, if it comes from me or others, or spiritual information in a correct manner. I'm verbalizing right now, but if I'm directly would communicate with you, it would likely be some scattered. So your third eye, if you will, if you want to relate it to your chakra system.
So what needs to be done with my third eye?
You could open it further, see various tricks that there are, or simply listening to what you consider your higher self more.
Okay. Well, they're always wise words in general. Is there anything else?
Your throat mainly. Your throat. Communication.
Yeah.
Okay. It's something that might throw up in your life in different situations more. However, since now you're communicating openly, but in different situations, there might be more necessity for being more spoken.
What, speaking from my heart more?
If you want to call it such, yes.
As the saying goes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess to refine on that topic, say like when my girlfriend pisses me off or something, so you talk about matters of love, and like the previous person says about treading on eggshells and just speaking your mind. I guess what you're saying is you just speak your mind, you know, in a loving manner, and then just staying firm in yourself, your own self-love.
Yes, certainly. Don't be afraid of creating conflict, otherwise you might just put it down and again you get what you call passive-aggressive situation or toxicity in the area. Be more outspoken and in a friendly manner, but speak.
Okay. That brings me to another question. When I look at like the different density layers as consciousness, as some people say, they refer to the fourth density as the density of love. Would you agree with that?
I would consider them dimension, but if you want to call it that, yes. Trust
Okay.
is the dimension of love, unconditional love, if you will.
Conditional love, is that what you said?
Unconditional love would be the
Unconditional love.
fourth dimension. Condition is perhaps more the second.
Okay, because I read different things about it, saying that it's either expressions of like service to others and loving others, and service to self and loving oneself. Would that be an interpretation of it?
It would be a good idea to balance those.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have any tips in balancing those two between loving yourself
Go with the flow. Don't even need to interpret those things as two separate things. Don't even need to give a label on it. Just be of service to the moment.
Okay.
Just
That
be
makes
in
it good.
service of the moment and do whatever feels like the right thing to do. And if you sense that somebody is struggling, like your son is struggling with a learning lesson, and you feel like you should let him struggle so he can learn from himself, or if you should go over and help, just go with the flow. And you can see there how you don't need to call it either one of those two things.
Yeah, that's a very dualistic way of looking at it. It was just something I read, so I wanted to clarify it with you. Yeah, but basically, yeah, I guess I won't take much more of your time. Is there anything else that you want to speak about today before I go? Since we don't speak that often.
Gladly speak to you again if that's suitable or directly. It's entirely up to you. You can always tune my frequency, but then you would have to open your third eye further while remaining grounded. It's entirely up to you if you want to work well with my frequency or use David's help or any other tool that you might find useful.
So basically the most personal differences you're saying are just working on my throat, my communication, and my groundedness while being more expanded.
Yes, and of course your heart.
And my heart.
Yes, as you already said, speaking from your heart, existing from your heart, being in your heart.
Is there like certain traumas that I have built into my heart that I use as a defense mechanism?
Yes, certainly everybody in your world has. No need to dwell on those, however. Just open the heart further and accept that love is natural and everything else will crop up as it needs to be processed if it needs to be processed.
Okay, so in regards to myself, like, is it just the most important to have my self-love first? Is that my first priority, would you say?
You can have love for others and serve at the same time. There's no need to have a time frame installed there. Once you understand that everything is interconnected, if you sacrifice yourself for others, then you're not perhaps loving yourself. And if you're holding love back, you're perhaps not loving others. But you don't need to go through a step-by-step process. You can do it right now.
No, I guess. But if you don't have myself, then what do I have? So I guess I feel like by loving myself, that reflection comes back.
There's likely something, yes.
Okay.
It's also what the reptiles will probably have an easier time relating to, if you want to call it in such a manner.
Okay, why is that?
It's likely something the reptiles also have an easier time relating to, something like the love concept. From my understanding, it's both at the same time, but if you wish, you can interpret it in such a manner.
Okay.
Just be in a state of love, that's all that matters, really.
And then when we're talking, are you energetically working on me at the same time?
Mostly that's what I'm doing, yes. The talking is more sizing.
Yeah, because I feel a lot different than I did, say, 10 minutes ago.
That's the main reason I'm communicating with your kind. It's more like the talking is almost like a distraction.
Yeah, and then synchronistically, I guess, I had to drop my son because I love my son and all these things we're talking about, drop him at school and all that. And I normally would speak to KALASK, but obviously need to speak to you today to balance that part of myself out. So thank you for that, Metax.
That's a reason. I thank you also greatly for the co-creation in that manner.
Okay, well, much love, and I'll see you around soon, buddy.
Talk to you another time in whatever way you choose for your conscious mind. Goodbye for now. Good love.
Goodbye, mate. Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Metax, does David need some water?
That's a good idea.
Well, we are at the end of the queue, but I didn't allot myself some time, so I'm going to take this bit of time left at the end for myself to talk to you. And I think the first thing I want to ask you is I want you to offer some wisdom to us, humanity. Really specifically, I want, if you can talk about this AI issue we have, and really a lot of people losing a lot of basic thought functions, and they're being driven by AI so much that they're being not as aware of their bodies and their surroundings as much, and it's somewhat shocking and very concerning the direction that's going. And I just want you to offer some wisdom for humanity going forward in future generations, and how this is going to affect us, and what steps we really need to take to stay centered within our heart and bodies.
Most important part is that you don't necessarily find it as a detriment and are not in the state of fear, otherwise you become further down the same issue you don't want to go create. It's most importantly. And then of course it's the idea of understanding that everything is interconnected energetically. You can use your internet and other electronic devices to mimic that, but remember that it is more like a crutch that you can use if you will, to get an understanding of the real thing, but you can also use telepathy in general. And once your sciences will finally allow themselves to acknowledge the reality of something beyond the physical fully, and then the rest of your society will likely follow, since you have put science on a certain pedestal in your society, even though it's limited currently in its own definitions. But individuals obviously don't need to necessarily have a scientific understanding of everything that works in detail, and just goes directly in the terms of tuning into the frequency of going through the process of understanding the non-physical, the possibility to, for example, have a telepathic communication with me like I'm doing right now, well, through David. However, you can also talk to me directly, and I'm talking to you while I'm speaking through him simultaneously anyway. And obviously with each other, your so-called spiritual concepts via telekinesis or telepathy, etc. If you're tuning more into those, they're also related to emotionality. You'll also have an easier time interacting with your species, with anybody out here, with nature, etc. Of course, placing yourself physically in nature without electronics can be helpful. It's not a necessity, but it's possible. And overall, being aware that those things are real and just actively, that's important, actively using them, not just believing or disbelieving, but using them on a regular basis so you get an understanding for them, and therefore make the electronic gadgets an addition without becoming dependent upon them, because they will likely increase in your immediate future. But if that results in a disaster or just remains an addition, is up to you. If you make it your all-encompassing ruler, it will likely be more disastrous, but it's entirely how you decide to go about this process. It's really more about if you're willing to use the non-physical assets, possibilities you have or not. If you have them and depend on them, then the electronics will just be a side thing. But if you think that, for example, the only way you can communicate with somebody on the other side of the planet is through the internet or through a phone, etc., then you make yourself more dependent on it. Of course, you also limit yourself to your own planet, since it's something that exists on Earth, but no doubt here we're not using electronical gadgets in the same manner as you are doing, even though we have the possibility. So, to put it short, the non-physical is the way to become independent of them. Of course, you could also live more primitively again, living more in nature without that as much electronic. If you need that, I don't recommend you necessarily to own a television set, a radio set, and all kinds of different electronic gadgets, a mobile phone on you all times, etc. It is perhaps more beneficial if you are able to exist without those, but the best way is to find ways to use the telepathic and other non-physical psychic abilities that make those electronic gadgets not useless, but not as important and not as dependent upon.
Yes,
There is a
I
great
agree.
desire in your species for having those abilities, but you might trick yourself into using the electronics as a crutch for too long, like when you're learning to drive your bicycle when you're young and you have extra wheels on your bicycle to not fall off. You don't need to keep them on forever, or you might eventually forget it's possible to drive without them. When you understand the metaphor.
And I think part of my anger in general, I've basically shunned a lot of social media because just out of my anger and frustration. And I don't know if I'd ever go back or not, but I feel like for healthy for me, like you said, to connect organically. And that's where I feel like my center is. It's always my center. And I'm hoping the silver lining out of all this is that people do find that internal center as well. And if more people do, we can all, heal a bit better, I think, too, and using it as a tool. So I'm going to hold that intention and a healing one in general, because I think our whole planet needs it. We all do. And I thank you very much for speaking with us through David and being that voice of reason. So I appreciate it.
I hope I am the voice of reason and also of love at the same time, but I understand that your species likes to separate those, which is not a necessity, but I also thank you greatly for participating in the interaction, all of you, and your willingness to learn and grow further from where you are. The very fact that you're willing to communicate with someone like me. So David shows that you're open to the possibility to also communicate with me directly and in other manners, and transition what you just mentioned that might be problematic in order to move to a higher state of consciousness. You have already taken an important step just with that alone. Thank you for that as well.
Yes, thank you. I feel like the feelings have been my grounding force. They've always brought me back to center. And so I will forever be connected. It's just the way I will live and the way I will be forward. So thank you very much, Metax. I think we are at the end of our time, even a couple minutes shy, but we're going to give that back to David. So thank you very much.
Much love to you. Thank you for the facilitation and the moderation, and maybe speak again, whatever time frame that you choose to tune into my frequency in whatever way or manner you decide. Goodbye for now.
Much love,
Goodbye.
Metax.
Much love.
Oh.